biography of Edric Baker, who was a Wellington doctor who spent 35 years in Kailakuri, Bangladesh. And I know we have at least one Bangladeshi here today as well, so welcome. So Edric pioneered a model of healthcare for the poor. He began his studies here at Victoria University in Wellington, a place where many of us have also studied. And his work has attracted awards from the New Zealand and Bangladeshi governments. Sadly, he passed away in 2015, leaving a lasting impact on those he worked with in his community and all those who knew him. But not until now, not many of us, who didn't know him directly, knew actually his story. So today we get a bit of an introduction into his story to learn more about this inspiring person. So I'm really excited to be here today because I know Kate Day. We both live in Newtown. We go to the same church, and I think it was in 2017, Kate had just, recently returned from a stint in Cambodia, which I know was a time that really impacted you, Kate. And Kate would wander down really early in the morning to our house. We would have morning prayers and coffee, and we'd often pray that she would have words to write that day as she was writing this book. So, and here we are, the book is finished, so what a journey. And so to introduce us to this book this afternoon, we're going to hear from the author, Kate Day. We're going to hear from Gareth Morgan, who's a long-term supporter of Edric's project, and from Rosie Fife, director of the New Zealand Church Missionary Society, and Peter Wilson, the former chair of the New Zealand Kailakuri Link Group. And afterwards, if you haven't already, you'll be able to buy a copy of the book for each member of your extended family. So I see that many of you bought copies already. So without much further ado, I'm going to invite Kate to come forward. So we'll hear from Kate first. Kate's originally from Christchurch. She's lived here in Wellington for the past 7 years. She works as a researcher and advocate on social and environmental justice issues, particularly around mobilising church people to get involved. Kate's an inspiring figure, and I know that she's found Edric's story really inspiring as well. So she's married to John Luke, and their 2 children, Wilfred and Evie, arrived while Kate was writing this book. Now, Kate says she began this project reluctantly, and a unique series of events led to Edric's story taking over your life. So, Kate, what made you start out on this project?
Oh, yeah, so thanks Hannah, and just thank you so much everyone for coming along. I just want to check that people can hear me at this volume. Cool. If I dial it down, just give me a wave and I'll speak more loudly. So 11 years ago in July, I was living in Christchurch where I grew up, and Edric Baker came and spoke to my church, and there was a group of Church Missionary Society supporters who rounded up all of the university students like me and said, you guys have got to come along and listen to this guy. And so we went along, and I remember Edric speaking about the healthcare centre that he had set up in Kailakuri in Bangladesh more than 3 decades before. And what struck me as someone who wasn't a healthcare student was the phenomenal low cost that he managed to deliver healthcare. He was doing outpatient care for, at that time, around $1.40 New Zealand dollars per person. And when I was comparing that to my own doctor's bill of $50, $60, that just was flabbergasting. And so after his talk, I had a real urge to go and talk to him. And so I raced up to him after the talk and bombarded him with questions. How did you do this? Have you written it down? Can this project be replicated? And Edric was very polite, but he said to me, look, no one's actually documented this. He'd been head down, 12-hour day healthcare centre. And so I went away from that talk still fired up, and that didn't go away. And so a few days later, I was still thinking about this and thinking someone needs to capture those lessons. I got in touch with Edric's organisation, the New Zealand Kailakuri Link Group, and at that point Edric had moved on in his fundraising tour. He was only visiting New Zealand for a short time. He was elsewhere in the country. And I said, look, I'd love to interview you. Can I interview you wherever you are? And he said, oh look, no, actually I've got no time before I fly back out to Bangladesh. But then he paused and he said, actually, tomorrow I'm going to be on a bus from Parapara Umu to Auckland. If you can get yourself onto the bus, you can interview me. And so I lived in Christchurch and it was early afternoon. So I had to book a ticket right then to fly and stay with my uncle Graham and jump on a bus the next day, hoping that it would be the bus from Wellington that Edric would get on at Parapara Umu, so I'd be able to interview him. Fortunately, it was the right bus. Edric got on, and for 10 hours he talked about the healthcare centre, and I interviewed him and audio recorded that discussion. And then afterwards, he flew back to Bangladesh, and I flew back to Christchurch and wrote up the interview, pretty much just word for word what he'd said, sent it to the New Zealand Kailakuri Link Group, and that was that. My job was done. Had no more further contact with the organisation. Moved overseas, and then in 2015, I learned with sadness that Edric had passed away, and I thought, wow, that was an amazing guy. I was really, really glad that I met him. A few years later, I made a New Year's resolution to get into writing. And I was thinking poetry, limericks. On January 2nd, out of the blue, Peter Wilson from the New Zealand Kailakuri Link Group emailed me and said, would you write Edric Baker's biography? When we talked about this idea with him, he mentioned you. And it took a lot of thinking, but I said no. Because I was not qualified to write a book. I had questions about Edric's life, but I really didn't feel up to the task. And also, I thought it would take too long. I thought it would take about 2 years, and 2 years would be too long. But that nudging feeling that had got me onto the bus to interview Edric was still there. And so eventually, after many attempts to find other jobs and other things to do, I said, maybe I'll do the New Zealand interviews and then pass the findings on to the biographer. And then I did those and they were very interesting. I thought maybe I'll do the Bangladesh and the Vietnam interviews and then send them to the biographer. But after that, I was absolutely won over. And so I bought a book called How to Write Biography. And I took heart from libraries, which are full of books, many of them written by first-time authors, that it would be possible. And so those questions that I had at that time were, what had driven Edric to keep him going for 35 years, more than 35 years? What had sustained him? What was the answer to the question that drove him? How do we deliver healthcare for everyone? And was Edric onto something in the model of how he delivered healthcare? And so I got to work. I want to pause here to thank the New Zealand Kailakuri Link Group because they took a huge chance on me and put a lot of trust in me to research and then write Edric's story. And I also want to thank those who gave money towards the project. So that was Christian World Service, the Link Group, and supporters of the Link Group, and also Te Kotahitanga Trust. The journey of writing Edric's story had many high points. I'm just going to name a few of them. For me, The research stage was a huge extended high point. I loved that part because I spoke to dozens, if not hundreds, of amazing people in 3 countries. It was just phenomenal. Many of the interviews were through translators, and I got to meet people I would never have crossed paths with otherwise. It was wonderful. There were thousands of documents that I read about the project, including hundreds of letters. Edric was a regular letter writer. Thank goodness. I don't think the project would have been possible had he not been. And so hundreds of his handwritten letters to and from family who kept his letters for all those years were part of the project. There was also a remarkable thing during the course of research, which was that I had barely spent time with Edric, and yet I'd had an intimacy with him by the end where I had stroked the lock of hair, his baby hair, in his mother's diary, and I had visited his grave. A remarkable honour and privilege. On the research, for relating to the research stage, I want to thank particularly my mum, Faith Alexander, who's there. And Mum accompanied me on almost all of the research trips. So she came around New Zealand with me, she came to Bangladesh with me, and she meticulously scanned and took notes on thousands of documents. So she was the research assistant.
Sure.
And because she was with me all the way, she has been a sounding board on all of the major decisions about how the book came together, and she's been a wonderful companion. I met a lot of amazing people during the course of writing this book, but I want to single out one, and that is Peter Wilson. Where are you, Peter? Peter is someone who really deserves his own biography written about him. Do talk to him, his life story is incredible. Peter is has been the chair of the New Zealand Kairakuri Link Group, and he has been a faithful friend to Edric for decades. We're lucky that we're going to hear from him shortly. But it's been a joy getting to know you, Peter. And through that process, Edric has overseen the project of the biography. And through meeting and getting to know Peter, I've seen firsthand the wisdom and the camaraderie that Edric would have experienced in this very, very dear friend. Thank you, Peter, for all that you've done. Another high point of the biography, the journey of bringing the book together, was the process of design and actually bringing the finished thing together into something that looked like a book, had cover, had pages. We were getting close to getting good to go. And I want to thank particularly here the photographers, and there's many of them in many different countries who've contributed photos for the book. But as you'll see when you flip through, they bring it to life in a really wonderful way. And I also want to acknowledge the graphic designer Emma Bevanage, and I want you to remember that name for any graphic design project that you have, because Emma is wonderful and coped with me through many meticulous changes right through to the finished project. So her name is written there on the acknowledgements page, and do get in touch with her for unbeatable graphic design work. The last stage of the book project that I want to speak about is the bulk of it, which is, of course, the writing. And this was a really hard stage, because if you've ever done writing, it's a battle of the will to keep going. It's you and your laptop. It's a very lonely sport. And it was really hard. It was really hard to keep going through all those years. I want to do a shout out here to everyone who read copies of the draft, so Peter and others, Graham. Many people gave feedback which was invaluable. The particular subset of the writing challenge that I then encountered was writing while parenting. And that is not a solitary sport. And it's one that can only be done with extensive support. And so here I really want to do a major shout out to my mum and dad, Faith Alexander, who for many times hosted me for writing retreats, took the children, allowed me to actually get on with the process of writing. Had it not been for that, we wouldn't have a finished project today. I also want to give the biggest shout out to my husband, John Luke. John Luke has been a constant source of support. When I asked him, when we were fairly newly married, should I buy a plane ticket right now and go and interview this guy, he said, absolutely go for it. And ever since that day, he has been nothing but encouragement. And if it wasn't for John Luke, we would not have a book today. So while it might say by Kate Day, it is absolutely a joint project. Like all our projects, this one is shared. So my hope for the book, there are three hopes. The first is that, I hope it's not a spoiler to say, but Edric was onto something. And he was onto something in quite a number of the areas of his work. But the diabetes treatment model that he developed is quite possibly one of its kind in the world. He and his team developed diabetes care that costs a few cents per day, whereas elsewhere in Bangladesh it would cost 10 or 100 times that within Bangladesh alone, let alone other countries like New Zealand where the costs, we can imagine, are much higher. Diabetes is a growing concern, and there are still places that don't have insulin access, that don't have the education on how to manage this really complex condition. And Edric is onto something, and we can learn, and I hope we do learn from his model and apply it to others. My second hope for the book is for all of us, that we draw from it not only a deep challenge, but also an encouragement. I feel like the 7 or so years that I've worked on this project have been living with Edric. And as one of the interviewees said, saints are difficult to live with. And it has been dispiriting at times to be writing about this life lived in complete abandon for others, a hardcore and radical life. And in many ways, I'm unable to make the choices that he did. And that can be dispiriting. But what I've learned through getting to know Edric over this period of time is that Edric's philosophy was completely the opposite of that. He specialised in seeing unqualified people, illiterate, labouring Bangladeshi people who hadn't finished school, and seeing in them the potential that they could be a paramedic to serve their own community. And so someone like me, who wasn't a writer and wasn't a biographer, could become one. And that kind of encouragement is enormously empowering to all of us, that we don't have to have a qualification, and that actually we do have something to offer, and in fact, that's the only way we're going to get any of this stuff done. So that's the encouragement that I hope we take, and it is a lesson that I believe that Edric learned from his Lord Jesus. The last hope that I have for this book is that the story will go full circle. So Edric, when he was in his teens, he read the biography of Albert Schweitzer. Now, Albert Schweitzer was a doctor who worked in French Equatorial Guinea, and it was a well-known missionary story at the time Edric was growing up. He read that book and he thought, I want that kind of life. I want that dream to become my dream, and that turned his life in the direction that it went. And so my suspicion is that this book doesn't need to reach thousands of people, but maybe it just needs to reach 1 or 2 people for whom it will have that kind of effect. And I don't think they don't need to be a young person. There's a story in there that inspires me hugely of Libby Lang. And Libby was a New Zealand woman who learned about Edric when she was, I think, in her late 50s. and she went and became a volunteer nurse on the project and was there in support of Kalakuri for over a decade. A really significant contribution and a really significant part of her life. So there will be people for whom this story is life-changing, and I hope that this book finds those people. My request to you is to help to get the book into the hands of people who will hear this challenge, this encouragement, and perhaps this complete turning life on its head transformation as a result of Edric's story. I think that's a really fitting way that we can honour Edric Baker.
Thank you, Kate. Kate, your story of how you've written this book is really inspiring, and I know we can all sense your passion and your dedication to bringing this story to life. So thank you. I'm sure you, like me, are sort of thinking of people that might also be inspired by hearing this story. So now we're going to hear from our next speaker, who I'm sure needs no introduction, Gareth Morgan. So Gareth and Jo Morgan have supported Edric Baker's project since 2008 under the umbrella of the Morgan Foundation's program for Kiwi Heroes Abroad. And they did have the opportunity to visit Edric at Kalakuri and see his work firsthand. And so today Gareth is going to share about the impact that Edric Baker had on him. So please welcome Gareth.
Thanks very much, Hannah. And well done, Kate. Awesome book. Hey, I thought I'd sort of add to the story in terms of the original contact we had with Edric, which was probably not replicated by many. We had, were not long into sitting down with this pile of money that we'd got from Trade Me. It was quite a lot of money, and it was sort of too much really for us at the time, and we decided I did, that we'd give it away. Sharon was rather horrified, but she came along in the end. And so therefore it became an issue. How do you actually give money away responsibly? It's actually really hard. You know, it's almost as hard as making money actually. But anyway, so I mean, obviously we could have done it really fast. It's about 50 million, it's a lot of money. We could have done it really fast by just getting in an aeroplane, flying over the Warwick and biffing it out. I mean, but then, you know, that then became, how satisfying was that? So then you look at the charitable sector, and I think you have to have the working assumption that every cause is worthwhile. It's very easy to dismiss all causes, very easy, but that's a cop-out. By far the bulk of them are worthy. So that's fine, working on that assumption. How now do you decide how to allocate it? This became very difficult, and it just tortured me for quite a few years. So we landed in a position initially where we had three areas of interest. One was public policy research, which was my background. Another was conservation, and the third one was social work, predominantly overseas. So with that particular area of interest, the criteria really that we settled on initially was that the beneficiary had to have scale, so that we weren't reinventing the wheel all the time, but you know, they were an organisation that could get economies from the resources they were devoting. So you know, minimal, the idea there was replication. Also, if you had a organisation that had grunt and had size, you had succession. because I've seen so many projects, one person projects, that died with the person, and that is one of the hardest things with in this sector. So we ruled those completely out. And the last criteria we used was it wasn't to be religious, because I'm a devout atheist, and so the last thing I wanted was other agendas in this area. So you can very quickly see here that Edric violated every single that we said. So we really settled on doing most of our offshore work with UNICEF. So we didn't pick Save the Children, we didn't pick, what's the other one, I've forgotten, because of their religious bias. So UNICEF was the one we went with. And we've done a lot of great work with UNICEF, but I've also seen them violate the very criteria that we had chosen them for, which is that top-heavy bureaucracy and actually programs getting captured by vested interests along the way, whether they're all the things that we were trying desperately to avoid with these endeavours. So that we didn't get disillusioned, we just realised the limitations of the criteria we had set, and it was a wee bit unrealistic. Wasn't how the world really worked. And then one year, we must have had a bit of a profile that year on this. It was essentially a knock on the door, and it was Edric and Peter, who's just been mentioned. And they came in to my room in Wellington and told me about Karakuri. And I sort of looked at them and got my tick box out. Fail. And it was very polite, but said, yeah, see you later, sort of thing. And off they went. That was on one of Edric's whirlwind tours. And I actually can't remember, maybe Peter will remember, but I can't actually remember. But I got the material from Karakuri regularly, and I think I just got captured by it because of the inspiring nature of the guy. And we'd had a couple of failures in the big projects. We'd had some good success, but we'd also had terrible failure where we had capture by people in countries delivering this aid. So we decided to give it a go. We decided to get to know the Karakuri project. And it really just went from there. We ended up going there and seeing Edric in action, and it was an absolute mind blow. Like, you just wouldn't believe it unless you saw it. So, every patient has to bring their own nurse. Right? They call it a hospital, but really had dirt floors, and so your relative looks after you, but the care is so basic, so rudimentary, that it's just hard to get your head around it. And then you see the numbers in terms of the people that go through this facility, and the outcomes. And you just look at it and you say, how on earth can this actually happen? It doesn't feel right. And you get on a bicycle, because Edric's pretty keen on his bicycle, and you start cycling around these villages while he does his outpatient work. And the condition of the people is like horrific, just horrific. Basically near death for a lot of them. And then he goes and does his work and gets back on his bike and goes to the next one, and you follow him round, and it's very difficult not to be moved by this. So then we decided that we'd scale up our assistance. I think at the time, Peter will remember, but I think at the time Karakuri was in a spot of bother financially. So we sort of stepped it up a bit. And because it was more money, I was sort of obliged to understand the project more in terms of money in, money out, outcomes, all that standard stuff we learn at school. And so I said to Edric, so just tell me now, how does succession work here? So, you know, you walk under a bus, what happens to all these people, all these field workers that you've trained to be paramedics? Now you're the only doc here. The whole thing just collapses, does it? That's it, that's your succession plan? It's pathetic. You know, you need to improve it. I said, we do a lot of stuff with UNICEF. Why don't I go and get them fired up? Basically tell them if they don't get fired up, we'll stop funding them. That would be a way to do it. And they can come, put a bit of grunt behind this, and we'll get replication. And Edric said, yeah, well, here's the history on replication. I've got all these blockages in the actual bureaucracy in Bangladesh that I can't get past. They have a certain model of healthcare, I don't fit it, end of story. So they won't actually help. And UNICEF's requirement is that you must have assistance from the recipient nation. You know, that's how they get their legitimacy. That's how they manage to operate in all sorts of places, from North Korea to, you know, wherever, because they get the commitment from them. So he had a real issue there in terms of his succession, which Peter will talk about this, I'm sure, but since his death actually, they seem to have very successfully overcome. So you tried these different things with Edric in terms of, well, why don't you do it this way? And he's, you know, such a polite man. He's just amazing. But really, the response every time was get lost. That was really what he meant. He had a certain model, and he would not bend on it. And you can see why, because it was successful. So from his mind, if he bent, it put the project at risk. And it would all, you know, collapse around him. So he was so strong that he was able to resist change, which was sort of a positive and a bit of a negative, because it had us all, Peter included, I think, worrying like hell about how is succession going to work here. You know, once this man stops, it's looking really bad. You know, like the rest of the Bangladesh health system will just pick over the carcass, sort of thing, and take the, you know, and it would go. Now, thankfully, that hasn't happened. So, you know, it's wonderful. But I, at one stage, I can't remember when it was, I described Edric as follows. I said, I'm not religious, but if I was, to me, he would be a saint. And I mean that.
Absolutely.
For your work and partnering with Edric and trying to grow the impact of his work. I'm hearing a theme of how captivating his life and his story really is. So our next speaker, I think I met probably in this very room, another dear friend. So Rosie Fife is the National Director of the New Zealand Church Missionary Society, which supports Kiwi Christians serving all over the world. And Rosie previously served as a CMS mission partner in Cairo in Egypt for 5 years. So for Edric, CMS in the UK was a significant support when he first moved to Bangladesh in 1979. Later he became a good friend of CMS groups here in New Zealand, and many in the CMS community have been long-term supporters of his work. So Rosie will share some about the significance of Edric's story to hear. Welcome, Rosie.
Thanks, Hannah. Kia ora koutou, it's really good to be here with you. I never got to meet Edric in person, but I was, when I joined the CMS community as a mission partner I joined the prayer community and used to pray for Edric and also for Libby as she served. So there's a sense that you kind of feel like you engage in people's ministry through prayer. My second encounter was actually almost a mystical experience in an Uber just up the road here. I'd been about 2 weeks as a national director of CMS, and I was talking to the Bengali Uber driver, and he said, "What do you do?" And I said, "I work for an organisation that sends volunteers overseas." He said, "I saw a documentary once about this New Zealand doctor who lived like the people, he dressed like the people, he ate like the people, he lived in poverty." And he said, if everybody in the world lived like this, the world would be a perfect place. And for me, it was such a, and I found out it was Edric, and it was such a kind of reason d'etre for this job for me of sending missionaries long term, why we exist as an organisation, and the kind of impact that even Uber drivers are talking about this legacy. It was a really beautiful moment personally for me. And it reminds me of why we do what we do. At CMS, there's a sense that probably in our community, Edric's kind of normal, and that we have a lot of people who've served a long time in various cultures and various rural areas. They learn the language, they live in the community. There's a sense, as I read Kate's book, that Edric also stands out. His simplicity of living. I think the story about the bike seat, that if you haven't read the book, he got to the point he didn't have a bike seat, and his community said, "Edric, no, you need to have a bike seat. That seems essentials for living." I think we talk in our organisation, lots of mission organisations, about risk. What's a good level of risk? And I think his stories from his Vietnam time of staying as the North Vietnamese army came, that takes a lot of bravery, and I was really inspired by that. He was obviously a man kind of single-minded in his kind of ideals of how healthcare should look. And I think a sense of being ahead of his time. There's lots of community development theory that I think you could study up the road here at Vic that would talk about the kind of work that he did of healthcare for the poor, by the poor. So I guess for me there's a real inspiration professionally in this role as CMS as we keep sending out missionaries around the world, that there's a sense that it's a bit of a foolish vocation to give up your life and to live in this whole other culture, learn another language. But there's a foolishness that brings great reward, I think. And I think personally there's a challenge in the book of living by ideals, and I think Edric was inspired by the person of Jesus, and that's an inspiration for many of us still. I just want to say thank you to Kate. I know this has been years, and I'm glad you chose to write this rather than a limerick, but maybe this is coming.
We'll never know.
And I've bought a few copies today, and just say to you, if you have anyone you give the book to who thinks, "Oh, I could do that. I could be one of those people that gets on a plane, serves around the world," that's what CMS exists to do. So always happy to have a coffee with anyone who might read this book and feel excited about a missionary call. Thank you so much, and it's great to be here.
It shows we all need to be surrounded by these stories, I think, and the work and the life decisions that we make. So thank you. And so our final speaker today is Peter Wilson, who's overseen this biography from the beginning. And Peter met Edric in Vietnam in 1969 when Peter worked for the Red Cross and Edric worked for the New Zealand surgical team. They later reconnected, and Peter visited Edric in Bangladesh during one of his visits to Asia. Peter became a long-term friend and eventually chair of the New Zealand Kalikuri Link Group, a team of New Zealanders that fundraises for Edric's project and that has brought this book to life. So welcome Peter. Peter's going to share.
Thank you, Hannah, and thank you for emceeing us today. And thank you, Gareth and the Morgan Foundation. When Edric and I came and saw you in 2008, I have a very clear memory of that day. And towards the end of Edric telling you what he did, I said that one of our weaknesses was that there were lots of family and friends and people in New Zealand and around the world who gave $10 here and $20 there and 50 and 100, and the income was uneven, and it got a little bit tight and difficult at times. And you said having lots of mom and pop supporters is a strength, not a weakness. And there's truth in that to this day. And you then said, and I might say, Edric at that time was 67 years old. He came from a family of long genes. I think his father was 94, Glenn?
Yeah, he was 92.
And his mother was over 100, lived to over 100, outlived Edric. So the thought of Edric finishing, nobody had ever thought about it, here or in Bangladesh. And you said, I think you've got a succession problem, and I will give you, or the Morgan Foundation will give you X generous amount for 5 years. We will see you through that succession process. And in fact, the Morgan Foundation supported for a lot longer than that. And looking back at it now, I can see that significant amount coming in every year actually the demand there is huge. You could multiply what Kylie Curry is doing 100 times, and there would still be need for 100 times more. Looking back at it, what I can see is that funding, that constant, steady, assured funding for those period of years from the Morgan Foundation gave Edric the confidence to actually expand and meet some of that extra need. I looked up last night. In 2008, Kylie Curry serviced 27,000 outpatients. Now, in 2015, when he died, they serviced 47,000. And the staff had been expanded and trained, all local villages, none with a education more than high school, and some of them only with primary school, but trained on the job, and so good at their job that today, interns, there's a waiting list from a big medical school for interns to come and sit with the paramedics and learn how to diagnose. So since then, things have got a little bit tighter because costs are going up, and at the moment they're servicing about 45,000 outpatients a year. They wouldn't be doing that, I don't believe, had it not been for that input. So a big thanks to you. And similarly with CMS, directly and indirectly, right from the beginning and right through to the end, support was there. And of course CMS supported Libby Lang, who in effect sort of brought up, you could say it was Plunket, Bangladesh version of Plunket. They had a program, but it was struggling, and Libby, who was a Plunket nurse, was able to really strengthen that, and that's quite a big part of the whole program to this day. So thank you, CMS, for that. Interestingly, it spreads. If in villages where under the Kylie Curry Village and Childcare Program, maybe there'd never been a mother from there before, but the Kylie Curry staff are visiting the mother before, during, after the birth of the baby, and talking about good nutrition and hygiene and so forth. And do you know what happens all the time? That message goes through, and the number of outpatients that are presenting from that village drop. And the knowledge has come through that. So that's really been great. We will never know how many people Edric touched during his life. It's impossible to know. Countless, not just medically. When I've been there 3 times, I think, and I would sit there and watch, and half the day he wasn't working medically, he was sitting down. Some poor girl's husband wanted to marry a second man, or was running away, or the family problems. He spent a lot of time patiently listening to all sorts of things and counselling. How many people? We will never know. I've said a few times recently, semi-jokingly, that Edric Baker is world famous in Bangladesh, but unknown in New Zealand. And Kate, I hope that one of the other things this book will do is that his story will be a little bit better known here in New Zealand. And in that way, he will touch more lives. The same group who have supported Kate writing this book and printing and publishing it have also funded a Bangladeshi, I think he's a sociologist, anthropologist, excellent guy. He's done a magnificent job, and it's been translated into the Bengali language. I said Edric is world famous in Bangladesh. Through a New Zealand connection that Gareth met, who was involved in TV in Bangladesh. Edric was on TV twice. He flew very much under the radar. He didn't. But he was twice on TV in Bangladesh on a program, a magazine program that is the longest running and most popular TV program in Bangladesh. And when it was the first time, he became famous because there was a shot of him cycling down a little narrow lane, bananas, on his bicycle. And he became known as the doctor on the bicycle. This is amazing. Doctors only drive Mercedes and BMWs. And he became known all around Bangladesh as the doctor on the bicycle. So when it became known that he was terminally ill in 2014, some of the Bangladeshis, including that fellow from the TV, pulled strings, and there was an act of parliament, legislation, and he was given an honorary Bangladesh citizenship, only the third in 50 years. And it was presented to him live on television. The numbers, us from a small country, the numbers are sort of hard to believe. There was a live audience of 20,000. On that TV program, which is called, I don't know Bangladeshi pronunciation, it's called Yadi. On a quiet night, they have 40 million viewers. The night that Edric was presented his honorary citizenship, there were 80 million viewers. That's 50% of the population of the country. The presenter of that, of course, is a very famous man, celebrity really. Everybody in Bangladesh knows him. And I somewhat differed and wrote to him and asked if he would do a forward for the Bengali edition. And he very enthusiastically and happily has. So it goes without saying he will publicise that on his program. How many sales will there be? It's impossible to speculate. Bangladeshis, although a lot are illiterate, actually they're amazing readers. There's a whole host of English Bangladeshi newspapers, big circulation. The biggest book fair in the world is in Dhaka. Next year, in February, Kate's book will be at that book fair. I got an email on Friday from a publisher recommended by that presenter of it, Yadi, enthusiastically saying, we would love to have the rights for the Bangladesh and world distribution of the Bengali edition of Edric's biography, and we're to talk this week. So Kate, the impact of your book is that how many people are going to read in Bangladesh? Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. So Edric will continue to touch the lives of so many more people. And this would not be happening, Kate, were it not for the fact that you slaved away for so many years on that job, and you've done a magnificent job. Please. It's been a journey. If we look at Edric, we're all different, right? It's sort of one of the miracles of the world that there's 7 billion people and we're all different, and we've all got different sort of capabilities, gifts, talents, I think they call it in the Bible. Edric had gift in medical field and person-to-person counselling and so forth. He really developed that, and the impact was phenomenal. And I think that you've been given a gift in researching. You enjoyed that so researching, as you told us, and you've done it so well, and you have developed your gift into fantastic writing. You have captured the essence of his spirit. I'm getting phone calls. We haven't launched the book really, that's what we're here for today, but there's been a few sales, maybe 150 or something up to date. I'm getting phone calls from people I've never heard of. I'm not sure how they even got my phone number, and said, just read that, this is phenomenal, it's a wonderful story, thank you very much. So Kate. Oh. It's only a little token, but I just want to say thank you for everything you've done on behalf of the Kailakuri Link Group, the Kailakuri staff, the whole Kailakuri family. Thank you so much.
Thank you to our wonderful speakers, and thanks to you, friends and supporters. So before you go, just so that you know, we have copies of the book over here on the table. Glenn will help you out. They're $25 each. You pay by EFTPOS, cash or internet transaction. You might want to buy a second or even third copy for somebody that you would like to inspire with this story. And all proceeds go to the continuing work of the Kailakuri Healthcare Project. So if you want, you can also make an extra donation, which would be tax deductible, so ask Glenn about that. And if you've been inspired by hearing Kate speak, you can invite her to come and speak to your group or network to help spread the word about this book. There's also a couple of opportunities at the moment to go and volunteer at Kailakuri. So they're looking for an English-speaking volunteer to help with communications for 2 months or more. So if you are good at writing or maybe doing a little bit of finance or website work, then please talk to Peter or Kate. But other than that, have a lovely afternoon. Thank you for being here, everyone.